Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is a Bronze Jian from Hanbon Forge, and before I get into the video, some disclaimers and caveats. One, it's a review sample. It was sent to me by the folks at Swordis. A while ago, they gave me some credit to review their website and get some swords from it, and this is one that I chose. If you think that makes me biased in some way, you know at the start, I'll link the video where I purchased it and picked it out as well in the description down below, as well as measurements and where you can get it and all that kind of stuff. The other bit, I don't study Chinese swordsmanship, so I don't know how to move it around, though this is a really old style of sword. I don't know that anyone necessarily does, but I digress. I certainly don't. And the last bit you should know is that this one was sold. There was some confusion, I guess. It was initially sold as sharp, so I thought I'd be able to use it. I didn't get a sharp one. I don't think they sell them sharp. I sharpened it anyway, so if you see me using it, it's not something that it's necessarily intended to do, but I did it anyway, and I'll put that caveat out there as well. The last bit is that Thomas at Medieval Review is also making a video. I will link his in the description down below as well. He's going to do some other stuff, give his thoughts on the sword, and we're both going to put the video out at the same time, and it's going to be awesome. So hopefully you enjoy his. If you like this one, go check out Thomas's video as well. See his thoughts on it for a completely different perspective. We are not collaborating in the sense that we're sharing each other's thoughts, so we're going to watch each other's videos probably at the same time, and it's going to be super cool. So check it out if you're keen on knowing more, probably from the historical and smart guy perspective about this sword. All right, sword friends, I'm going to move on with the video here. So $196 is what this sword costs on the Swordis website. It might be a little less if you use a coupon code that may or may not be available depending on when you watch it, but $196 is not a huge amount of money. I'm less familiar with the Jian market in general, but when you add the bronze factor onto it, I have no idea what other options are available to tell you if this is on the high, low, or middle end side of things. But I can tell you in the general realm of swords, it's towards the beginning level, the entry level of swords. 200 bucks isn't necessarily going to get you a lot. This is a simple bronze sword. It comes with a stand. It came with a nice little box, but no scabbard or anything like that. And I'll tell you, the Sword of Goujian is just this historical find that's fascinated me. I've seen photos of the sword. I've seen it talked about, and it looks amazing. And I wanted something that, you know, was kind of like it. For $200, I'm not expecting a one-for-one replica of one of the finest archaeological cool swords of history, but I was hoping it would have some similarities to it. Anyway, that's the hope for this sword. So I'm going to move on with the review and talk about the parts, bits and bobs, fits and features. I'll go over the build quality, hopefully give you some idea of what to expect. Then I'll go out and use it a little bit, even though it's not really meant for it. And then I'll tell you if I think it's worth it or not at the end. So, all right, sword friends, I'm going to move on with the bits and bobs and fits and features. I'm going to start with this pommel area here, which is, I believe, attached to the grip. The grip and pommel appear to be one piece, the cross another, and then the blade a third. I don't think that's how they were constructed historically. I could be wrong on that, but I don't believe so. Anyway, the pommel bit right here has some circles kind of that look like they would be normally turned in or cut in, but this is likely a cast piece. I've seen patterns like this on historic Chinese swords, so it's at least reminiscent. I don't believe it's necessarily one for one, but it's handsome looking, and I don't imagine it'd be comfortable to be bopped with either. Now, the shape of this is like a disc that sits at the bottom, and it has some tapering and chamfering, so it doesn't hurt my hand, and it's actually pretty comfortable. It stops my hand from sliding down, and this wheel doesn't stick out far enough where it really bumps into the flub of my hand all that much. So I'm actually surprised at how comfortable it is, because I thought this would hit my hands as I was moving it around, but it's actually pretty ergonomic in terms of how it feels in the hand, as well as how it feels when you hit things hard with it, which I've now done with this sword a little bit. Moving up from there, though, the grip is more cylindrical. Now, each little cylinder in the center, it has little risers on it, which seem to be, I don't know if they're welded together or if it's molded in one piece, but I'm not exactly sure. But they do have some taper in them, so they kind of dip down and have some shape and dimension to them. It lets my fingers rest in here, but I would say that my fingers don't find a great home here. So my hands are too big. The risers kind of separate me from the weapon rather than make me feel connected to it. So they are there. It does prevent me from sliding around a little bit, but at the same time, it's not super comfortable when I'm holding it. It also doesn't index at all, so it's just round, and I think that's probably historic, or at least that's what I think it might be from the photos. I can't tell exactly, but that means that I don't index it well, and whatever way I hold it, if I close my eyes, it's kind of tough to tell where the edge is. This is very stout, very heavy in the hand, and that's not necessarily problematic. The old bronze sword that I held from 2,000 years ago in the Oakeshott collection was also surprisingly heavy, so I wasn't necessarily expecting it to be a dainty feeling thing, but I can't index it. I don't know where the edge is. It's not intuitive at all. But it doesn't turn in my hand as I was hitting things. If I do index it, it seems pretty stable. If I hold it tight and try to twist it, it doesn't move around in my hand. And I was cutting water bottles and things. My hands got wet, and I didn't find it turning in my hands, which I actually thought was kind of surprising. So I think it would be, well, it's hard to index. Once I do, it doesn't move around. And frankly, it doesn't have an edge. It doesn't cut particularly well. So I don't, it's more of a hammer than a sword anyway, or at least this one is. So I don't know that it matters. It's more the discomfort from the impact of this thing rather than the edge of it. Moving up, the grip and how it transitions to the guard is a little bit weird. The circle bit like stands proud of the cross section, and I don't know if that's the case historically. It's tough to tell because I can't see a lot of historic photos from every angle, but it meets the pommel down here well because it appears to be cast in one piece. But up at the grip, it stands proud and it looks a little weird. I can kind of make out the top section of it. It also has come loose a little bit after impacting things. Not a lot, but I can turn it and wiggle it just a little bit. It also has had this little pin down here exposed. Now, I only see it on one side versus the other, but I believe this is like a mechanical connection holding the tang of the blade in. It is something that I didn't see at first when I got the sword, but after using it and after some patina has occurred on the bronze, I can make out this brass pin a little bit better. This pin appears to be made of brass, and I believe the rest of the blade is supposed to be made of bronze. The crossguard is the next bit. Now, it sits with the grip reasonably well, except for I can make out the grip. And the cross actually reminds me of the Sword of Goujian probably the most. And it seems to have a similar shape, and it has the recesses for whatever kind of stones or jewels or something might have been in there, or lacquer work. And I can imagine if you're a craftier person than me, you could perhaps fill this with some epoxy resin or something like that to fill it in, make it colorful, make it even more similar to the way some of those swords in ancient China would have looked when they were at their height and not degraded by time. The gap in the crossguard is also really surprising here. It fits really, really well. It's cut to shape really well. And there are some fullers or hollow ground areas, for lack of a better word. It's not ground necessarily. I think it's probably cast in that way. And the crossguard fits really well and is nestled well in between there. So the crossguard area gap here is surprisingly good. That's something I look at in European swords. It's a mark of craftsmanship and quality. It's probably hard to do and get right, and the fact that it's this tight here is good. Now, it doesn't move around, and I don't imagine this crossguard is going to do much other than keep your hand from sliding up when you thrust. I don't know that it's going to offer much in the way of hand protection. As it is, though, it's good, and actually I think one of my favorite parts of the sword. Moving up to the blade here. So it has kind of a similar profile to the Sword of Goujian. I can make out the text. I don't know if they're at all the same. I can't read the writing, though. I'd be surprised if I could. It's a very old version of Chinese, as I understand it, or whatever language is spoken at the time. Anyway, it has the Sword of Goujian has these little symbols. There was a video I watched once that explained what they mean, like it was made for the king or by the king for his personal use or something like that. But anyway, some cool text going on here. And then it has this kind of diamond and cross pattern going across the blade. And this is very tactile to the hand. I can feel it as opposed to the original blade. The photos make it look like they're not recessed in here the same way. This looks like it was likely etched in or cut in some way. I'm not sure how it was done, on the original piece, but I don't think it doesn't give me the impression it's as deep or recessed as this one is. This one also has a very pronounced bevel that is raised, so there's very deep fullers kind of along the entire length of the blade, and then it goes to this like axe wedge kind of shape on the edge. It's also incredibly thick throughout the blade. I'll put dimensions in the description down below. Now, one of these edges I sharpened, so it's like a millimeter wide flat spot on the edges as they come, but I was able to bring a belt sander out and hog off the bronze until I could get an edge that was at least sharp enough where I didn't want to touch it, and that was the edge that I put on it. I would have to really thin it out to get it not to be a very pronounced cutting edge, because there's so much meat on the edge here that it's more of a blunt force weapon than a cutting weapon. But I was able to get a kind of edge on it, at least one sharp enough where I wouldn't want to run my hands over it, at least not with a lot of pressure. So that was what it came with. Again, it didn't come sharp. It does have the kind of taper that happens roughly 2/3 up the blade. It kind of has this little step that goes up that I see on the historic Sword of Goujia, but it's less pronounced on this piece than it is on the actual antique. And I don't know the actual dimensions of the antique, and so I don't know how similar this one is, but it's pretty short little sword guy here. All right, sword friends, just to wrap up kind of the experiences I've had with the sword, I did move it around, and it's stout in the hand and moves around kind of cumbersomely. It's actually one of the least comfortable swords I've had to move around. Again, I held a sword from the Oakeshott Institute, which was not an antique Chinese sword, but a bronze sword from a few thousand years ago, and it also surprised me in how short it was and how heavy it was and how not fun it was to move around. But it was more refined than this, had a more sword-like weapon feel than this does. This feels a little bit like a sculpture, and that's, when I'm swinging it, it reminds me of this one-piece sword I had from a different video, and the mantra of that video was, it's like swinging a sculpture, and that's kind of what this one is like too. It's cumbersome in the hand, it doesn't move around well, and then in cutting, I've lost the edge and developed some rattle because it's likely not intended to be used. Initially, it had, well, not initially, after some work and effort on my part, it had an edge that I wouldn't want to run my fingers across with a lot of pressure, and I've lost that edge, but bronze isn't known for its edge retention, and so I'm not terribly surprised by it. But in terms of cutting, I was able to do some thrusts and some cuts, and it really more smashed targets apart than anything else. I was able to get a few cuts in there, but they were never great cuts. The edge is really wide on here, so it's not surprising, and the sword dulled pretty quickly after some of those cuts. So not something that's going to be a sustained backyard cutter. I thought about doing more tests in terms of like how well does the edge hold up in comparison to steel, but given I'm not sure what kind of bronze this is, what the alloy is, and also it doesn't seem to be terribly similar to the actual sword it's trying to emulate, I don't know how useful that would be or not, but maybe that'll be a future video. Anyway, in terms of cutting, not super fun. In terms of smashing pumpkins, may be fun, but in terms of actually cutting, not super fun. And since it's developed a rattle already, I don't know about longevity in terms of actually using it as a historic piece. So if that's your aim, probably not the best idea. Anyway, that is the useful thoughts I can give you on the sword. Close-ups of the bits and bobs, fits and features. The last thing that I'll talk about is kind of, did it do the thing that I wanted it to do? And like I said at the beginning, I wanted something that was something close to a historic Chinese sword, similar to the Sword of Goujia. I'm not expecting one of the best swords ever made to be recreated perfectly for $200, but I thought it'd have more in common with that sword than it does. And honestly, I don't know where it's missing. It's hard to find details about that sword, but just from the photos, it looks like the planes are different, the lines are different, everything is quite a bit different. So it's more of a sculpture that brings up the subject of the Sword of Goujia for you to talk about and maybe, you know, delve into Chinese history and some of the cool weapons and things that existed in that period. But is it similar? If you pick it up, will it give you some idea of how that sword moved? And, you know, no, I don't think it would. At least that is my guess. So that's all the information that I can really share with you. Hopefully it has been helpful and given you some idea if something like this is worth your money or not. Is it worth the money though, in my estimation? No. This is like a sculpture of a sword, is not necessarily something that I would like to have. So I'd rather spend the $200 on a steel jian that is a little bit more representative of a piece from history than a bronze sword that is, at least I think, probably a bit more of a departure than their steel counterparts are. So no, but at the same time, if you were looking for something that isn't sharp, something that you can hang up, bronze is cool. It doesn't rust. People can handle it. It ages in patina as well. While it was dull, my son picked it up, and while it's pokey, I also didn't have to worry about him cutting himself, so it's a little bit more safe to have around the house if you have kids. Those are things that may be redeeming if you like it. It is a reasonably well-made piece, and for something that isn't made to be used, to be smashed into things and still hold up is not a bad thing, to its credit. But it's just a little bit more of a departure than the bronze swords I was looking for. And I hope that somebody eventually does make a reproduction of the Sword of Goujia from, well, at least a little bit closer and affordable to what the original was. Anyway, those are my thoughts. To me, this one is a no, but at the same time, I could see why some people would like it. It's not necessarily a bad sword. It's just further off than what I was hoping it would be. But that's all I've got. Hopefully you found it interesting. Cheers, and thanks for watching.